Hey there, welcome back to Online Marketing Foundations. We're still in Module 4, which I guess we're always still in Module 4 now at this point, since this is the last module, but we're talking about how to convert your audience to buyers. In the last lesson, we talked about how to create the right offer and how to think about creating an offer that is likely to convert. Now, in this lesson, lesson 4, we're moving on to how you're going to craft your messaging. And this is an important piece. You have to be thinking about how are you going to communicate. Remember, way back in Module 1, we talked about part of the job of a marketer is communicating the value of an offer. And so this really is that piece, how you're communicating that and what messaging you need to use. And you'll see as we go through this, we are not talking about sales gimmickry. We're not talking about tricks. We're not talking about any of that stuff. What we're talking about is how do you construct the right messaging that will kind of connect with the right people and get the right people to see, hey, this is the offer for me, and make the decision that it's the time for them to get it, if it is. But again, it's not about twisting people's arm or FOMO or any of that stuff. It's about helping the right people make the right decision. Really, everybody make the right decision and the right people make the purchase. That's what you're after with your messaging. So let's go ahead and dive in. We're going to start with a truth bomb, which is that if you're struggling in business, chances are pretty stinking good it's about the messaging. Again, I'm going to say this over and over again. You'll hear me, if you're in my world, talk about this a lot. Whether you're struggling to get people's attention, you're struggling to get people to consume your content, or you're struggling to sell, there's a pretty darn good chance that it comes down to messaging. Now, it could be that your messaging is off because your product or your offer is wrong. It could be that your messaging is off because you haven't taken the time to understand your people, or it could be because your messaging is off because you haven't really gone deep enough. But no matter what it is, there's a good chance that when you're struggling, there's something wrong with the messaging, the communication that you're trying to get across to your audience. Remember, one of the jobs of a marketer is to communicate the value of an exchange. And so that's what you're trying to do here with messaging, is communicate the value of an exchange so that the right customers will make the purchase. So hope you hear this and you understand that you need to learn how to kind of create the right message and how to do your messaging right. It's not something you can skip. And candidly, I don't believe it's something you can outsource. You need to actually know how to do this yourself. So in this lesson, we're going to cover a couple things. First, the 5 phases of messaging that converts. And second, how to think of conversion content as a single journey and how to think of it as kind of, taking someone on a journey over time. The next lesson will be about funnels, where you'll learn how to kind of put these pieces into the right place, but we're going to talk about what the messaging pieces are here in this lesson. So we'll start here with the 5 phases of conversion messaging. And what I want you to get is there's not just one message you have to get across to people. You have to use different pieces of content, different types of messages for people who are at different phases in thinking about buying or coming into your world. You need to be thinking about this in phases so you really understand the different things you're trying to do. So the first phase is about building your influence as a thought leader. Basically, this is about getting people to pay attention. This is what you should be doing when we talked about your content, when we talked about figuring out your core differentiators. All of that stuff is feeding into this influence piece, this influence messaging, which is all about making you stand out. So again, like I said, the influence phase is about highlighting and making the case for your core differentiator. So it's not just saying what you believe, but explaining why you believe it, explaining why you do things differently so that you will attract the right people. Again, you won't convince everyone, but this stage will build your authority among your people. The people who buy into it will be like, okay, hey, this person I get this person. They're right. I like the way they are thinking and the way they are approaching this problem. So that's how this piece is going to come in. And I say piece, it's more than one piece, but how kind of stuff in the influencing phase comes in. It's going to help you to really build authority with the right people. And here's an idea for you. you should always be influencing. In other words, this isn't something that you only do during conversion. This is the bread and butter, what you're doing day in and day out in your business when you're talking, when you're doing it. So the content, your content pillars we talked about in the last module, a lot of that is about this. It's about establishing your influence so that people are starting to hear your message, are attracted to you, and are beginning to come around to your way of thinking. That's the idea of influencing. Now, the second type of content, or the second stage of messaging, is to inspire your audience to see and believe what is possible with the opportunity you offer. In other words, this is about helping people to see, okay, if I do, and in my case it would be, if I, build a business the way Bobby teaches me, here's what is possible. It's that kind of thing of getting them to see what could be in their life. This is where case studies from your prior customers and your personal success come in. And, this is where kind of telling these stories, weaving in case studies, which in the last module in the core stories, we didn't talk about case studies because I explained to you that is about conversion. A case study, if you don't really know what it is, you do. It's kind of a testimonial. It's you telling the story of one of your customers and the success they had through following the method you teach, or, through the help that you provided them, or whatever it is. Basically, you tell the story from their perspective, and it's very much like your origin story, but it's about a third person. You're talking about the pain they were in, how they were struggling, what their problems were. Then they came upon your product, your service, whatever it is, and that made a change, and here's where they are now. So that's a case study, and it will help you. So you're telling your origin story and these case studies, and that starts to inspire people because they see themselves in the before. And when they see themselves in the before, but they said, well, that person was in the same place as me, but now look at where they are. Wow, that might be possible for me too. It's about getting them to believe and be inspired. Now, inspiration content is almost always about telling stories because that's how we inspire people, by seeing that other people used to be where they are and now are where they want to be. And so that's what you're going to do in the inspiration stage. Again, this is a piece that, depending on kind of how you are, selling, you'll be weaving this throughout. If you listen to my podcast, you'll hear me talk about people in my coaching group because I'm always kind of talking about that and wanting to inspire people to see what is possible if they adopt this way of thinking. So that's kind of the second piece, is inspiration. The next phase of messaging is what's called ownership, and it's to get your audience to believe it's possible for them by having them take ownership of the task, okay? And this is kind of what I want you to understand is, like, people might say, well, Sally was able to do it, but I wouldn't be able to. Okay. So this is about kind of making the inspiration, making people internalize it, because some people will look at other people and say, well, they were able to do it, but I would never be able to because, and they have some kind of limiting belief about what they would be able to accomplish that has to do with them kind of saying things for them. Well, you help them overcome that by helping them to take ownership, which generally means having them do some work, right? Having them take some first steps and see, oh, wow, I actually can do this. So how you're going to do this comes down to the funnel and kind of, when you're going to do it. But the idea is to get them to do some work to see that it is possible for them. In other words, have them it's kind of like giving them a homework assignment. Now, a lot of people aren't going to do it. I'm going to be honest with you. But the people who aren't, if you can get them to take that action and to actually make progress, they will then see, oh, this is possible for me. Those things, that he told me about so-and-so, ooh, yeah, that could actually be me. It helps them really internalize the inspiration. And quick hack, freebies that get people quick wins are a great way to do this. So to be very clear, one of the things, I do it for radical giving reasons, but I give away my privacy policy legal template. And part of the value of that is a lot of people would say, there is no way that I could use a template to create a legal document for myself. I would always just have to hire an attorney for that. Well, my template, by giving this away, guess what I do? I give it away. They get a video that makes it very clear and very easy on how to do it. People do it and say, oh, I could do this. So then that opens them up to the possibility and to the inspiration, or that they're inspired to say, oh, I really could do this myself if I buy the other templates. So it's a way of letting people see they can do the work and can actually make the progress. So a freebie is a great place for this. Now, the next part of your messaging is called the gap. And it's basically to highlight the gap between where they are and where they want to be, and like the things they need to accomplish. And then, by the way, your offer will close that gap. But so what you do is, like, after you've helped them to see the inspiration, you say, okay, now what you have to do is, and you're going to help people understand, you've got to get this, and oftentimes it can be like kind of going over and helping them understand the different pieces of what they have to put in place. And then when you make the offer to them, your offer will line up and help them understand, hey, I'm going to help you do all of those things. This offer, when you buy, is going to help you to close. You don't use the word gap, but help you too. And then you kind of and it's going down the exact same things that you presented to them that they need to do to make the progress they want. So creating the gap, and again, it's not really creating the gap. The gap is already there. It's helping them to see the gap, to understand, here's where you are, here are the steps you need to take to get to where you are, and then you're going to be able to help them do that with your offer. So that's what it is. And again, basically this phase is about showing your audience all the things they need to get the results that they want. And your product then solves the problem because it provides them with all the things they need. So, hopefully your product has that match. Your product should be built so that it does give them all of the steps they need. So this should not be a contrived thing where you're just like, you define the gap based upon your product. It should be the other way. You should know the gap, and your product, your offer should close that gap. And all you're doing in this stage is highlighting those things so people see and understand it. Because a lot of times they just won't know. They won't know what they need. And you need to help them understand that because you're the expert here. And so that's what you're doing. Then the final stage of messaging is to bust the common objections that prevent people from buying your product. So again, what I'll tell you is everybody has objections. Some people would say every question about your product is an objection. I don't buy that. Some people just have questions and they're not the right person. But oftentimes when people are asking you a question, there's a deeper piece there that you have to understand. What is it that motivates that question? And it's normally some kind of objection. And this is just something that they're believing about, well, it won't work for me because. And even if you've helped them take ownership, they're saying, okay, fine, I can do that, but this product won't help me because, or it won't work for me because, or I can't do it because. And so it's all of those things, and your objection busting is about helping people overcome that. So this content is directed expressly at people who have seen your offer but haven't bought. Now, sometimes you'll actually do this throughout. You'll kind of be busting objections in advance, right? Because if you've done that, if you go ahead and do that all the time, you can pre-bust objections so you don't have to face them. But most often you'll be presenting these kind of when you're presenting the offer or after the offer itself. And what I will tell you is that identifying the objections that are keeping people from buying and busting them is something a lot of people don't do, and it will pay huge dividends. This kind of piece is like a lot of people will do some of the stuff in advance, but they don't think through this piece of what are the reasons why people would say, no, I can't buy this because, and then kind of answering those head on, because it can be hard, it can be scary, but you need to have answers to these. Now, what I want to be clear is, you're not trying to get people to buy if it's not right for them. For example, if people need to do something else before they're ready for your product, you should not. You should be counseling them out of buying. I do that all the time. But what you need to understand is there are some things where it's just people have an objection that is not a real reason not to buy, and you need to be able to address those. So that's kind of this last piece. Now, so those are the 5 types of content. Now let's talk about understanding the flow of conversion content, because we need to understand kind of how this is going to go. And what I want you to get is you can deliver the conversion messaging in really just about any format, okay? And this is what I'll talk about later. A lot of people get kind of fixated on the mechanisms and the how. Don't do that. What matters is that you deliver each phase of content and that you're generally delivering it in the right order. And, there's some objections, like some things that's different, like objection busting you can kind of be doing all the time in your content, etc. But you generally need to take people on the path through the messaging where they start with influence. They kind of see you as a thought leader. Then they get some inspiration. Then they take ownership, right? Because, you let them do the thing. Then you establish the gap so they understand all the things they need. And then you bust objections. If you take them on that path, it makes sense. But let me use an example. Like messaging about the gap won't make sense to someone who hasn't been inspired about what's possible. And what I mean by that is and this is a really good thing for you to understand, because the gap is often stuff where things can seem daunting to people, because you're going to say, well, you need to do this, this, and this. So let me step back for a second and let me get meta here. Let's talk about this BOMU framework. In this BOMU framework, in this program, in this course, you're learning about a lot of different things that you need to be doing as a marketer. Imagine if I presented this to you just as a big, long list before you were ever in my world or knew anything about me or had heard me talk about how this stuff can work and can make a difference. You'd look at it and say, well, I don't want to do that. And that's what'll happen, because some people, their gap, I can think of people, they'll create this, I don't even know what you call it. Maybe it's a mind map. I don't know, but it's showing all these branches and all the things you have to do within each branches. And it's literally I need a magnifying glass to try to understand what they're saying. And I've had that happen where I was first exposed to that before I had kind of heard the inspiration piece and the influence piece. And guess what? I said, I want nothing to do with this. So that's an example of where if people see that stuff first, it can actually be counterproductive, because people will get overwhelmed and feel like, I don't want to do that. Now, seeing the gap and helping them understand all the things they have to do is powerful after you've got them to the point of saying, I see what's possible. I want that in my life. And that's why I'm telling you, you've got to kind of think about this in an ordered manner of hitting them over kind of a journey and making sure they're going through the journey the right way. So that's kind of that piece. Now, what I want to say is that most online marketers should constantly create influence and inspiration content. Your content that you create on a weekly basis, which is about connection as much as anything else, should be building influence. It should be talking about the things you believe in, making the case for the things you believe in, making the case for your core differentiators, helping people to see you as an authority. And you should be sprinkling in inspiration of case studies of how it's changed your life, of how it's changed other people's lives. And then that way, people who are experiencing kind of that outward facing stuff, they have already started to hear these things from you. And hopefully then that's the stuff that'll be the first point of contact for most people. And that's what you want. You want the first point of contact to be this stuff, the inspiration, and the influence. Then the gap, ownership, and objection content generally goes only to people who've raised their hands. Now, sometimes the objection stuff is weaved through in your general content, but the other stuff will largely be to people who've raised their hand because they're responding to your influence and inspiration content. So that kind of means that way you can avoid the notion of presenting people with information about the gap or about owners taking ownership before they've started to already believe that you're someone who can help them. And that following your method, following your way, is a way that will give them success. So that's kind of the piece there. Now, figuring out exactly where to slot each message in depends on how your funnel is set up. And we'll talk about that in the next lesson, which is the final lesson here in this course. But once you kind of see and figure out what kind of funnel you're going to build, that's how you kind of figure out how you're going to do these things and how you'll actually slot things together. So the big takeaway, your message will establish you as an authority, inspire your audience, and make your offer a no-brainer decision if you do it right. But you got to do it right. So be intentional about your messaging. That's what you need to do to be thinking through this thing, thinking through the 5 different phases, creating it, being intentional about how you're going to do it, when you're going to do it, etc. That's it for this lesson. In the next lesson, we'll talk about how to actually build your funnel, how to put it all together. I'll see you there.